I'll start with the disparity. Do you need case law citations for this, or you're aware of it, Judge? Okay. The first case would be Sanders v. State, 510 Southern 2nd, 296. This is a Florida Supreme Court case from 1987.
One moment. 510 Southern 2nd. What was the other part of the citation?
I have copies, Your Honor.
296, and that's Florida Supreme Court in 1987.
Go ahead.
State versus Fernandez, 927 Southern 2nd, 939, which is a third DCA case from 2006.
May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
And then the third case, Judge, is State, I can't pronounce it, but State versus Kunkemoller, 333 Southern 3rd, 335. That's a first DCA case from 2022, but it is distinguishable because it does not address the issue of culpability as the first two cases do, but I wanted to bring that to your attention.
You may continue.
Thank you, Judge. I'll start with the disparity argument, if I may, Your Honor. In this case, there have been several co-defendants who have either been tried or entered pleas and received sentences. I want to, for this particular argument, relate exclusively to Luis Rivera. He testified in the trial, and through himself and other witnesses, Your Honor has heard what he did in this case. And what he did in this case compared to what the state has alleged and the jury found that Mrs. Adelson did, the culpability levels are very different. Mr. Rivera was allowed to enter a plea to second-degree murder. And although, as the PSI indicates, he received a sentence of 19 years in the Department of Corrections, that was run concurrent with a sentence he was already serving in a completely unrelated matter in a federal case where he got a 12-year sentence. So the number of years that he will actually serve for his participation in the homicide of Dan Markel is 7 years in the state of Florida Department of Corrections. His conduct, as Your Honor can recall, is that he traveled to Tallahassee sometime in June and scoped out the home of Danny Markel, engaged in some drug activity with Sigfredo Garcia, and then returned to South Florida. A few weeks later, he returned to Tallahassee and again scoped out Danny Markel's house. But he didn't just do that. Prior to arriving in Tallahassee, with himself knowing that he and Sigfredo Garcia were going to kill Danny Markel, he purchased and provided the very firearm that was used to kill Danny. He came to Tallahassee and they sat in wait outside his home. They followed him with Mr. Rivera being the driver, followed him while he took his two little boys to daycare, and he sat and watched as Mr. Markel, hand in hand, took those children inside the daycare. He then followed Mr. Markel all the way to the gym, sitting in wait. What was he waiting for? He knew what he was waiting for. Mr. Markel did not. He had no clue that these men were outside in a car just waiting for him to go to a place where they could shoot and kill him. And they waited until he exercised. They watched him get back into his vehicle, and then, like hunters, traveled and followed all of this time period straight to his home. And there was no hesitation. He knew exactly what they were going to do. Without any hesitation, they pulled right in behind Danny. Danny's car was still running, the garage door was up, and Sigfredo Garcia exits the car and shoots Danny Markel, having done nothing to these men, in the head twice. How Mr. Markel survived, I don't know. But then Luis Rivera is the getaway driver. They flee the scene, they flee Tallahassee, and then Mr. Rivera stops to allow Sigfredo Garcia to dispose of the murder weapon, which has never been found. And then he drives back to South Florida like nothing has happened, purchasing motorcycles and cars, but most importantly, getting paid for the work that he's just done. The payment came from Catherine Mangbanawah, and I'll address her in the next segment. The point here is, Judge, that over time, reading different things, you've heard a lot of arguments about what Mrs. Adelson's participation allegedly was. But when it comes down to it, and I didn't mention, but Luis Rivera did have an extensive criminal history at the time that he committed this offense. What actually came out at trial with respect to Mrs. Adelson, and I'm saying this understanding, as you've learned, that Mrs. Adelson still maintains that she is innocent of this conduct. But what the state was able to show through their testimony and evidence was that the role that she played, according to them in the prosecution, was very minimal. The evidence showed that she was very upset when relocation was denied in 2013, not knowing that her daughter had agreed to it, not knowing that until she sat here in trial hearing her daughter's testimony. She wrote some very ugly emails. She said some very ugly things. But in not one of those emails did it ever say that she wished harm upon Danny Markel. And this was in 2013. The evidence was presented by the state that was over a year later that Danny was killed after relocation had been denied. Although they argued that there was continued hostility on the part of Mrs. Adelson regarding the issue of relocation, with the hundreds of thousands of emails they had, they didn't present evidence that this ongoing dispute was being brought up in any way between the parties. The relocation between them, that issue had stopped. The testimony that was elicited was that Charlie Adelson, the son of Mrs. Adelson, was the one who was close with Mrs. Adelson, and that when she had a problem, the argument from the state was, when she had a problem, Charlie was the problem solver. And the testimony at court that was presented by the state supported that theory, that Charlie was the problem solver. They further elicited evidence, testimony, that without any knowledge of what the phone calls were, Catherine Magbanowa testified that when she was with Charlie Adelson discussing scenarios, which she didn't describe what scenarios she was discussing, that on occasion there would be a phone call between Charlie and his mother. She didn't hear the mother speaking. In fact, he left the room when he talked to, allegedly, the mother, and he came back in. He never relayed to her any information about the phone call. But the state's theory and the evidence that they presented was because Donna Adelson had been so upset about the fact that relocation was denied, and she continued to be upset, according to the testimony, that Charlie Adelson took it upon himself to reach out to someone, which was his girlfriend, and have her get someone that she knew who could commit this murder, make contact with them. According to the testimony in the state, in this case, Charlie Adelson told Catherine Magbanowa, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, it just says the names were reused, but Mrs. Magbanowa, that she wanted him killed and he would pay for that to happen. Her testimony was she had no idea what the payment was going to be, but she did in fact reach out to the father of her children, Sigfredo Garcia, and he agreed to commit the homicide. Mr. Garcia then elicited Luis Rivera to participate with him in the homicide, and I'm not going to go through all the evidence in the case. I want to focus on what Mrs. Adelson allegedly did. Up until the point of the homicide, the only evidence that was presented about Mrs. Adelson's participation were those ugly emails. And there's a distinction, as we discussed during the trial and sometimes even at sidebar, of the evidence being up to the moment that Mr. Markel was killed. Up to that time, the only evidence introduced by the state in this trial for that time period were those ugly emails, and they were ugly. She called him very foul names. She said some ugly language. She clearly was not happy. And whatever conversations may have taken place while Catherine Magbanowa was inside Charlie Adelson's home and Charlie was outside talking to another person. Mrs. Adelson maintains her innocence. But if you're looking at this particular cause of this disparity in treatment, the state is asking that Mrs. Adelson be sentenced to obviously life on count 1 as she has to be, followed by 30 years in the Department of Corrections on counts 2 and 3. This is far in excess of the sentence that was received by the man who himself testified to hunting down Danny Markel, providing the gun for him to be murdered with, leaving the scene of the crime, disposing of the murder weapon, and going on with his life in his gang as he always had. In that disparity, Judge, it just doesn't reconcile with the facts here of what they say Mrs. Adelson did. Although there was a theme that she was the mastermind, I would argue to the court that the evidence did not show she was the mastermind in any way. The masterminds that were shown in this trial were Charles Adelson and Catherine McBanawa. It didn't show any activity prior to Mr. Markel being killed where Mrs. Adelson was involved in any way.
Take away what you're arguing as the theme for the moment. The chief difference between Luis Rivera and your client is he entered into a plea, correct?
That's correct. He did enter into a plea, but that, according to the case law, that can be considered.
And he has also cooperated with the state, testifying in many trials.
He was a cooperating witness testifying in these trials. Mrs. Adelson not only has maintained her innocence, she was never offered anything from the state.
Please continue.
On the statutory basis, that the defendant was an accomplice to the offense and a relatively minor participant in the criminal conduct, some of what I've just argued applies to this one as well, Your Honor. But what I wanted to point out here were the ones that we didn't discuss. So Sigfredo Garcia was found guilty at trial, first-degree murder and conspiracy. His sentence was life on the homicide and an additional 30 years consecutive for the conspiracy count. He is the one who rode in the car. He is the one who obtained Luis Garcia to go with him. He is the one who sat in the seat knowing he was going to exit the car while they hunted down Danny Markel. And he's the one who got out and shot Danny Markel in cold blood. Left like nothing had ever happened. Along the way, made many stops, including getting out to hide the murder weapon, and then went on with his life. The killer is getting the same sentence that the lesser participant, the state is suggesting, get as well. Life in prison on count 1, followed by 30 years for the conspiracy and solicitation. Luis Rivera, I've already told you what his role was. Catherine McBanawa got the information from Charlie Adelson according to the evidence, and at his request obtained someone, Sigfredo Garcia, to do the killing. She is the one who coordinated between Charlie Adelson and Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera. Although she testified that she didn't know Luis Rivera was involved until after it was over, the evidence that the state submitted clearly contradicts that. She was communicating with Luis Rivera before, closely to the homicide, and then shortly thereafter. She's the one that spoke to him. She was sentenced on the first-degree murder to life in prison, and on the solicitation and conspiracy, she was sentenced to an additional 30 years. It was run consecutive. Again, the same sentence that they're asking for on Mrs. Adelson is the sentence that this woman who heard the request for a homicide, found the person to commit the homicide, stayed in communication with both of the individuals who are responsible for killing Danny Markel, followed up with them and provided payment to them, and then took payment back from them for her to keep for herself. She was also paid in this. She participated, knew it was happening. They had proof that she knew it was happening. That was submitted to the court. All of that evidence clearly distinguishable from the conduct that they presented in evidence about what Donna Adelson did. Charlie Adelson, according to the testimony in this trial and his own, Charlie Adelson wanted Danny Markel dead. So on his close or very first date with Catherine McBanawa, he asks her out in public at Halloween, some Halloween function, hey, do you know anybody who could get somebody killed? According to her testimony, she followed through with that. With Charlie Adelson, never with Donna Adelson, never communicated with her in any way about this. She worked then, if that's what happened and that's what's been testified to, she worked with Charlie Adelson from October of 2013 until Danny Markel was brutally killed in July of 2014. That entire period, and there's evidence, she admitted to most of it, to her conduct, and there's evidence that was presented in this trial in Charlie's that that's what happened. They made this plan, and that his stapled money was used to pay the killers in this case some $130,000 in cash that was divided up amongst Sigfredo Garcia. Sorry, my mouth is getting dry. Excuse me.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Judge. It was divided up between Sigfredo Garcia, Catherine Magbanawa, and Luis Rivera. She then stayed in contact with Charlie Adelson. She convinced Charlie Adelson to get paychecks written to her, and she received those paychecks each time from Charlie Adelson. So for what Catherine Magbanawa did and what Charlie Adelson did, the evidence in this case shows it went far beyond what the state's evidence showed that Donna did, up to and including the time that Danny was killed. So again, if you're going to rate the level of culpability in this case and consider Mrs. Adelson's conduct as compared to those, they're asking that she get the same sentence as both of the people who killed, well, one person that did the killing, Sigfredo, a far more extensive sentence than Luis Rivera, who participated in the killing himself and only got 7 years. The same as Catherine Magbanawa, that apparently worked on this according to the evidence for many, many months and stayed involved even after that. Charlie Adelson is the only one who got a higher sentence. His sentence was life on count 1, the homicide, followed by 30 years on count 2 and another 30 years on count 3, so everything being run consecutively. The evidence that the state has presented is that Charlie Adelson is the one who masterminded this. That's what they've shown. Even though they said Catherine Magbanawa wasn't her trial, if there's somebody who started this, according to the evidence, it's Charlie Adelson, not Donna Adelson. All the work being done was Charlie Adelson. All the money that was paid was Charlie Adelson's money. Mrs. Adelson, according to the state's evidence, did not do any of that. Again, they had hundreds of thousands of dollars, or hundreds of thousands of emails. Never one in all of those emails that we all had to go through did Mrs. Adelson ever suggest any harm to Danny Markel in any way. I understand the verdict, and she has a right to take an appeal, and that's what she'll do. But the evidence in what was argued is very far different in theory than what was actually presented to this jury. And I'm requesting that Your Honor, in determining a sentence on counts 2 and 3, take into consideration that the amount of activity that everyone engaged in this case was far, far beyond what was alleged against Mrs. Adelson. They just didn't come up with the proof for that. They did prove to a jury that she was involved, but that proof and the actual evidence was very limited to the conduct that they say that she engaged in that resulted in Mr. Markel's death. I do want to remark, if I may, just briefly on the issue of remorse. Mrs. Adelson maintains her innocence, and as she has a lawful right to do, will seek an appeal. She may not get another trial. There may or may not be parts of the finding of the jury that is reversed, may not. They can do that on, the appellate court can do that on 1, 2, or 3 counts. There are lots of options that the appellate court has. The reason I say that is this. Mrs. Adelson, maintaining her innocence, could not have shown more remorse for the killing of Danny Markel. And in her statement, although some of it I know was bothersome to the court, in her statement, I hope you heard.
I wouldn't say bothersome to the court.
Okay.
Please continue.
Okay. I misread then. I apologize based on your comments. One of the things she said in her statement after most of her statement being about the horrible thing that happened to Danny Markel, was that the people who were responsible for it were in prison. That's a pretty big statement considering what the state believes Mrs. Adelson's position is with respect to the others who've been prosecuted, convicted, and are serving sentences in the Florida Department of Corrections. I also want to say this. The defense's position in this case, from start to finish, has always been, on behalf of Mrs. Adelson, beyond respectful to the victim in this case, Danny Markel. He should not be lost in this case, and I said that in my opening statement. We presented evidence about a wonderful man he was. He did not deserve for this to happen. The Markels gave their statements at the conclusion of the verdict that was issued by the jury, and I listened to every single word. And every single word that they said came out of the terrible grief from the loss of their son and the feelings that they have developed over the course of this 11 years in prosecuting these various people and additional information that has been given to them. Every word they had every right to say. The feelings that they had are exactly what they should have. What happened to Danny Markel, as Donna Adelson has said in her statement, could not have been more horrific. He was treated like an animal, completely unaware that there was any kind of problem, that he would have any kind of physical altercation with anybody. I'm positive the furthest thing from his mind that day was that someone was going to kill him in his garage at his home. He did not deserve what he got. It's been very clear in the prior prosecutions and what was presented in Mrs. Adelson's trial about the conduct of these other individuals. They do deserve to be where they are. They do. Their conduct is unimaginable to me, that human beings would engage in that kind of conduct to bring a man, an innocent man, a well-respected man, an amazing father, to take him away from his mother, his father, his sister, most importantly, his children. That was horrific. I understand why those sentences were imposed. Not for Mr. Rivera, but for the ones that were tried and convicted. In this case, Judge, based on the evidence that was presented, the defense is going to ask on counts 2 and 3 that you sentence Mrs. Adelson to 3 years in the Florida Department of Corrections, counts 2 and 3 to run concurrently. My understanding in the court, the clerk can tell me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is Mrs. Adelson has 701 days credit time served. That's what we calculated.
I'll stipulate to 701, Your Honor.
Very well.
Anything more on counts 2 and 3, Judge? First of all, in order for it to assist Mrs. Adelson, she's going to have to be successful on count 1 on appeal. If she is, anything more than that period of time is going to basically be a death sentence for Mrs. Adelson. She is soon to be 76 years old. Her health has gotten worse while incarcerated, as anyone would probably expect. Her husband is 81 years old. Compared, 3 years compared to the man who participated in the killing getting 7 years, I believe is a just and reasonable sentence for Mrs. Adelson. We are also going to ask, Your Honor, after imposing sentence, I know it's nothing but a recommendation, but we would ask if you make a recommendation to the Florida Department of Corrections that Mrs. Adelson be placed as close to Miami as possible, where her husband resides, so that she can have visitation. I understand we don't have any control over Department of Corrections, but we would appreciate that recommendation. And may I have just one moment, please?
Go ahead.
While she's doing that, Judge, I would ask that Ms. Adelson not be housed with Ms. McBanow, or at least have a separation, if you could recommend that. I know Ms. McBanow is currently at Lowell CI.
Yes, Judge, I thank you for that, Ms. Kappelman. I wanted to raise that issue because we did check into that. Judge, I contacted the Florida Department of Corrections. They did indicate that they would be able to keep them separate, but that doesn't necessarily mean that folks who are familiar with and friendly with Mrs. McBanow wouldn't be where Mrs. Adelson would be, so we are concerned about that, about her being placed at that facility. I didn't know it before, but the reception center for the women actually keep inmates there. So that, I know that's a possibility, but again, that's in Ocala, and we're respectfully requesting that she be placed closer to Miami. Thank you.
Going to review the last case the defense has presented for downward departure. Ms. Keppelman, you had something else?
No, Your Honor, I don't.
Review the cases for downward departure, or in support of downward departure, the defense has argued.